The glass shatters, scattering shards across the asphalt. The boy, breathless, reaches his arm through the opening and tries to unlock the door. Inside, the baby's crying blends with the distant hum of traffic. Suddenly, a deep voice explodes behind him. "What do you think you're doing?" The boy turns slowly, eyes brimming with tears. Saving her, before it was too late. If this scene has already touched you, leave your like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss stories that stay with you forever. The sharp, dry sound of glass breaking tore through the heavy afternoon air in Harlem. Shards flew, reflecting the yellowish light of the setting sun as they fell onto the hot asphalt. Jamal Rivers, thin, 12 years old, dark-skinned, his eyes a mix of urgency and fear, kept his hand raised, still holding the jagged stone he had used. Sweat trickled down his forehead. His chest rose and fell quickly as if every breath was a battle. Inside the car, the baby's crying drowned out every other sensation. It was a sharp, desperate sound that made people on the sidewalk slow down and look. Yet no one came closer. Strapped into her car seat, the child's face was red, tears streaming down her cheeks. Her little arms flailed, trying in vain to find relief from the stifling heat that had turned the inside of the vehicle into a metal and glass oven. 125th Street was relatively busy, but on that narrow stretch of sidewalk, there was a tense silence broken only by the crying and Jamal's breathing. He knew that to anyone arriving at that moment, the scene would be obvious. A street kid, in worn, dirty clothes, smashing a car window to steal. And it wasn't the first time someone would have thought that. Only this time it was far from the truth. It was then that Daniel Harris appeared, coming from the corner. Tall, 38, light-skinned, his dress shirt sleeves rolled up to his elbows. He carried a small brown paper bag in his hands. Inside it, a bottle of medicine hastily bought at the pharmacy across the street. The sight of the broken glass made his body freeze. For a second, his brain processed it slowly. Car, shattered window, boy, stone, crying baby. The bag dropped. The medicine bottle rolled, stopping near the curb. Daniel ran. "What do you think you're doing?" The words came out loud, more as a reflex than a conscious decision. Jamal turned slowly. His eyes were wet, not from fear of the man rushing toward him, but from the urgency of something bigger. He didn't back away. He didn't run. He simply pointed into the car, still holding the stone. She couldn't breathe. Daniel looked. The sight hit him like a punch to the stomach. His daughter Ava, 2 years old, her skin glistening with sweat, her crying almost losing strength, which was even more frightening. The New York summer heat, combined with the closed windows, had turned the inside of the car into a trap. Daniel's hands trembled as he opened the door from the inside. He released the car seat latch and pulled Ava out, holding her tightly as if afraid she might fall apart in his arms. Jamal dropped the stone to the ground, the sound echoing faintly against the concrete. Some people began to gather, murmuring to each other. A woman in a floral skirt remarked to another, "These street kids, lucky the father got here in time." None of them had understood what had really happened. Daniel, still holding Ava, looked at Jamal with a confusing mix of gratitude and suspicion. "Why did you do that?" His voice was hoarse, almost breaking. Jamal shrugged, as if the answer were too obvious to explain. Because no one else was going to. A warm breeze carried the smell of fried food from a nearby street cart, mixing with the metallic scent of broken glass and the sweat soaked into Jamal's clothes. He glanced around, noticing more people gathering, and took a step back. He didn't want trouble with the police. He didn't want more accusing stares. But Daniel, still shaken, didn't take a single step to stop him. Something in the tone of that last sentence from the boy echoed inside him. Because no one else was going to. Jamal had taken only 3 steps when he heard the voice calling after him. "Hey!" He froze in place. Street calls like that rarely ended well. On other days, he would have quickened his pace, turned the corner, and disappeared into the tangle of people and car horns. But there was something different about this voice. It wasn't just anger. It carried weight, but also a strange kind of urgency, almost as if it were asking more than ordering. "At least tell me your name," Daniel said, Ava in his arms, his arm trembling with tension. Jamal turned slowly, eyes narrowed like someone measuring every move. "Jamal." He said it quickly but without looking away. Daniel nodded, repeating it mentally, wanting to remember, as if the name had just become important. "All right, Jamal. Why did you do that?" The boy took a deep breath, his shoulders heavy. He looked at the car, the glass scattered across the asphalt. I saw her crying. His voice grew firmer. It wasn't a tantrum cry. It was a trapped cry, like someone choking. Daniel felt a tightness in his chest. Jamal went on. I kept watching. No one did anything. I banged on the window with my hand, but she didn't stop. And then she started crying softer. He paused briefly, his eyes shifting away. So I used the stone. Daniel pictured the scene, and a chill ran through him. That pause in the crying, which any parent would recognize as a dangerous sign, had been the trigger for the boy to act. Around them, the world moved on at its usual rushed pace. Hurried footsteps, horns, the smell of street food, and the constant murmur of conversations that had nothing to do with them. But some stares lingered longer than they should. A man leaning against a lamppost shook his head in disapproval without even knowing the story. Two women exchanged quick whispers. Daniel felt his irritation grow. "Come with me," he said, his voice low but filled with resolve. Jamal frowned. "Where to?" "Somewhere with air conditioning, and where no one will keep looking at you like they already know who you are." There was a moment of silence. The boy didn't move right away. His body looked ready to run, but his feet stayed on the ground. Finally, he began to follow, keeping a two-step distance, the exact measure to escape if necessary. They walked to Adam Clayton Powell Jr. Boulevard. The sun glared off the building facades, creating flashes that forced Daniel to squint. Ava, on his shoulder, was still warm, but her crying had stopped. He adjusted his daughter, feeling her breathing slowly return to normal. They entered a small restaurant with a faded green awning and a ceiling fan turning slowly overhead. The owner, a middle-aged Hispanic man with a thick mustache, nodded to Daniel, who returned a brief nod. They chose a table near the window. Jamal stood for a moment, scanning the place. It wasn't just curiosity, it was mapping. He identified doors, counted people, measured distances, the reflex of someone who always needs to know the way out. Daniel ordered 2 sandwiches and a cold lemonade. Jamal said nothing, but the quick glance at the menu gave away that he wasn't used to someone ordering food for him without asking, "How much is it?" While they waited, Ava fell asleep in her father's arms. Silence settled, broken only by the distant sound of a TV tuned to the news and the clinking of cutlery on plates. "How old are you, Jamal?" Daniel asked. 12. "And you live here in Harlem?" The boy nodded. "Since my mom..." He stopped, closing his mouth. "Since I haven't had a home?" Daniel didn't press. Forcing memories was like forcing a lock. It only made things worse. "And what's that in your pocket?" Daniel pointed to a square bulge under the worn fabric. Jamal hesitated, then pulled out a black-covered notebook, smudged and marked by heavy use. He opened to a random page and slid it toward Daniel. The man leafed through it slowly. The drawings were intense, with precise strokes and expressions full of weight. An old man sleeping on a subway bench, a woman staring distantly while holding a baby, a dog lying next to a fire hydrant. Each face seemed to have a story, and none looked made up. "You did all these?" Daniel asked, keeping his tone neutral. "I keep the faces I don't want to forget," Jamal said without meeting his eyes. Daniel stayed quiet. That sentence carried more weight than the boy might realize. It was about memory, about not letting certain lives vanish without a trace. The food arrived. Jamal ate calmly, but with the hunger of someone who doesn't know when the next meal will come. Daniel watched, realizing there was something here far beyond an impulsive act of smashing a window. There was sensitivity, attention to detail, courage, and a vast, heavy loneliness. He took a sip of lemonade and let a thought grow. Maybe this meeting didn't have to end after that sandwich. Maybe there was still more he could do. Jamal's sandwich was already gone, but he kept his hands resting on the edge of the plate, as if he didn't want that moment to end so quickly. His gaze, however, was divided between Daniel and the street outside, a hard reflex to turn off. Part of him was always watching the exit, like someone who knows they might need to run at any second. Daniel, in turn, was still leafing through the sketchbook, going back to pages he had already seen, noticing details he hadn't caught before. Each line seemed loaded with an almost painful precision, as if the boy were drawing not only what he saw, but what he felt when he saw it. They weren't just faces. They were marks, shadows, broken stares. This one, Daniel pointed to the portrait of a woman sitting on the sidewalk, clutching a blanket as if it were a baby. Who is she? Jamal shrugged. I don't know her name. I saw her at 145th and Lenox Avenue. She was talking to herself. I drew quickly before she left. And this man here? Daniel turned the page to a portrait of an elderly black man, eyes closed, leaning against a wall with a grocery bag on his lap. He lives near the 125th Street station, always sitting in the same place. One day he disappeared. Jamal said it without changing his tone, but Daniel sensed the weight in the silence that followed. The man closed the sketchbook slowly. This wasn't just a pastime, it was a silent archive of stories no one else was telling. Faces that, without Jamal's pencil, might have already vanished from the world. Have you ever thought about showing these drawings to someone? Daniel asked. The boy gave a short, almost ironic laugh. Show them to who? No one wants to see them. Daniel leaned back in his chair, looking at him with renewed attention. He had the feeling he was in front of something rare, but he still didn't know how to act so that it wouldn't be lost. Outside, the late afternoon light was starting to change, taking on more golden tones. The street traffic had slowed a little, but the sounds persisted. The rumble of a bus, the clink of coins in a tin, the distant whistle of someone selling ice cream. Where do you sleep, Jamal? Daniel asked, knowing it was a risky question. The boy looked away. Depends. Sometimes in a shelter, but only when it's really cold. I don't like staying there. It's noisy, and people mess with your stuff. Sometimes I stay in an abandoned building, a few blocks from here. Daniel nodded slowly. That explained the always ready-to-run posture, the eyes that never rested. The restaurant owner walked by and discreetly placed 2 cookies wrapped in napkins on the table. Jamal looked at Daniel, and he made a go-ahead gesture. The boy put one in his pocket and bit into the other slowly, as if savoring not just the taste but the gesture itself. Can I ask you something? Jamal said, wiping his hands on the napkin. Why didn't you turn me into the police? Daniel took a deep breath before answering. Because I saw in your eyes that you didn't break that window to take anything. You broke it because... He looked at Ava, sleeping peacefully in his arms. Because she needed it. And because you knew no one else would do it. Jamal stayed quiet. That acknowledgement seemed harder to accept than anything else. Maybe because he was used to hearing only accusations. Daniel looked at his watch. Not because he was in a hurry, but as an automatic gesture like someone who needs to process time. Listen. He began, in a lower tone. Do you have somewhere to stay tonight? Jamal gave a half smile, but without joy. I always have somewhere to stay. It's just not always the same place. Daniel realized he was facing a dilemma. He could say goodbye right there, thanking the boy for what he had done, or he could take a step further. But any further step meant getting truly involved. The sound of the restaurant door opening interrupted his thoughts. A group of 3 teenagers walked in, laughing loudly, and sat at the counter. Jamal instinctively shrank, pulling the sketchbook closer. Daniel noticed the movement, the reflex of someone who has already had things taken from them carelessly. The waiter brought the bill, and Daniel paid quickly. He stood up, adjusting Ava in his arms. Let's go, he said simply, but in a tone that left little room for no. Jamal hesitated but followed. As they stepped outside, the warm street air wrapped around them like a heavy blanket. The sky now had orange and purple streaks, and the shadows of the buildings stretched along the asphalt. They walked for a few minutes in silence. Daniel didn't have a completely defined destination, but an idea was starting to take shape. He didn't just want to give money or food. Something inside him told him that what Jamal needed wasn't just to survive another day. It was to have something he could call a possibility. Have you ever thought about having a place to draw for real? He asked, breaking the silence. Jamal frowned. What do you mean by for real? Daniel gave a small smile. With a desk, good light, pencils that don't break all the time, and without having to keep looking over your shoulder. Jamal didn't answer right away. His eyes narrowed, not out of suspicion, but as if trying to picture something he had never seen before. Night was beginning to fall over Harlem, bringing a warm breeze that carried the smell of food from street stalls and the distant sound of music drifting from open windows. Daniel walked with steady steps but without rushing, carrying Ava asleep in his arms. Jamal followed alongside, a little behind, clutching the sketchbook to his chest. They arrived at a small brick building with a discreet sign above the door, Harlem Community Arts Center. The upstairs windows were still lit and shadows moved inside. Daniel stopped in front, looking up for a moment. "My sister teaches here," he said, as if starting to reveal part of a plan that had been forming since the restaurant. Most of the people who come are kids and teenagers from the neighborhood. Some had never picked up a paintbrush before. Others have talent they didn't even know they had. Jamal looked at the facade, trying to figure out where he was going with this. "And what do I have to do with that?" Daniel gave a faint smile. "Maybe everything." He didn't try to go in right then. The center was closing and he didn't want to force anything. But he did something that seemed simple. He pulled a crumpled card from his pocket with the name and phone number of Monica Harris. He handed it to the boy. "Show up here Saturday, 2 o'clock. Tell them I sent you." Jamal took the card carefully, as if it were something fragile. He didn't say he'd come, but he didn't refuse either. He put it in his pants pocket in the same spot where the restaurant cookie had been earlier. They kept walking. Daniel started to realize he didn't know exactly how far he should go that night. He didn't want to invade the boy's space, but he also didn't want to leave him to go back to an unsafe place. They reached a corner and Jamal stopped. "It's this way," he said, pointing to a narrower street. Daniel looked in that direction. The light there was dim, and some windows were boarded up. He imagined where the boy would spend the night and felt uneasy. "Are you sure you want to stay there?" "It's not about wanting," Jamal replied, in a tone that cut off any attempt at convincing. Daniel stayed quiet for a moment, then nodded. "All right, but promise me one thing. Saturday, 2 o'clock. The boy gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. Daniel knew it wasn't a guarantee of anything, but it was more than he had expected. Before they parted ways, Daniel pulled something from the backpack slung over his shoulder, a simple set of pencils and a pad of fresh sheets. They weren't expensive, but they were clean, unused. He handed them to Jamal without saying anything. The boy accepted them as if unsure what to do. "Just for when the notebook runs out," Daniel said, trying to sound casual. Jamal looked at the pad, then at Daniel, and for the first time that night, a shy smile appeared. It wasn't wide or confident, but it had something genuine. "Thanks." The word came out low but clear. Daniel watched the boy walk down the narrow street until he disappeared into the dimness. He stood there for a few seconds, taking a deep breath, before turning to head home. In the following days, Daniel thought many times about whether Jamal would actually show up on Saturday. The city had a cruel way of making encounters dissolve. He didn't have the boy's phone number, didn't know where to find him. Everything depended on a choice that wasn't in his hands. Saturday came. Daniel and Ava arrived early at the Harlem Community Arts Center. Monica was setting up tables with paintbrushes, paints, and large sheets of paper. Children ran from one side to the other, laughing loudly. Daniel, however, kept his eyes on the door. The hours passed. The clock hit 2:30, then 3. Monica noticed her brother's restlessness and approached. "Who are you waiting for?" "A boy." Daniel paused. He didn't want to sum Jamal up as a boy. "Jamal." She nodded. "If he shows up, it'll be because he believes it's worth it." Daniel smiled faintly, but inside he felt he might have asked too much of someone used to expecting nothing from anyone. 5 minutes before the clock struck 4, the door opened. Jamal walked in slowly, the black-covered notebook under his arm and the new pad of paper in his hand. He didn't say anything. He just looked at Daniel, who stood up, and there was a brief nod between them. Monica, who had never seen him before, noticed the way he held the pencil when he sat down at one of the tables. His stroke began firm, as if he had already mapped everything out before the tip touched the paper. Daniel watched from a distance, not wanting to interrupt. There was a new calm on Jamal's face as he drew. It wasn't full security, but a truce, as if in that space, he could lower his guard a little. Daniel knew this still wasn't the definitive gesture that would change everything, but it was the concrete beginning of something he wouldn't let slip away. The sound of pencils scratching on paper blended with the low conversations and timid laughter of the other children. Jamal was leaning over the table, the old sketchbook open on one side and the new pad on the other. He alternated between looking at the worn pages and starting new lines, as if continuing interrupted stories. Daniel watched from a corner of the room, leaning against the wall. Monica approached, bringing a cup of coffee. "He's good," she said, in a tone that left no doubt she meant it. "I'm not just talking about the technique. He has something rare. He sees the soul before he draws the face." Daniel looked at his sister, then back at Jamal. "He saved Ava," he said quietly, as if needing to reaffirm it to himself. "I don't know if he understands what that means to me." Monica gave a faint smile. "Maybe he understands more than you think." The hours went by quickly. When the workshop ended, the children began to leave in groups, carrying their work. Jamal lingered a bit, carefully storing his drawings. Daniel approached. "Can I see?" he asked, pointing to the sheet Jamal had just finished. Jamal hesitated for a second and turned the paper around. It was a portrait of a small child, wrapped in a blanket, sleeping in the arms of a man whose face was only sketched. The child's expression was serene. The man's was impossible to identify. "Is that Ava?" Daniel asked. Jamal shrugged. "Maybe." They left the art center together, the late afternoon light painting the facades in golden tones. Daniel knew that moment, as simple as it seemed, was fragile. If he truly wanted to change something for Jamal, he needed to act now, and not just with vague promises. They walked to a small cafe on the corner, where they sat near the window. Daniel placed a brown envelope on the table. Jamal looked at it suspiciously. "What's this?" "It's an invitation," Daniel said. "Not in the party sense, but for you to have a safe place to stay." Jamal didn't touch the envelope. "And what do you get out of it?" The question came out blunt but not aggressive. It was pure caution. Daniel took a deep breath. "Peace of mind, and the chance to see what you can do with your talent if you have the right tools." The boy was silent for a few seconds. Then he opened the envelope. Inside there were 3 things: a monthly subway card, a key with a simple keychain, and a handwritten note. "Room 3, upstairs, Harlem Community Arts Center. The door's open to anyone who wants to come in and create, but this key is yours alone." Jamal ran his finger over the key, as if to confirm it was real. "You're serious?" "Yes," Daniel answered without hesitation. "It's small, but it's yours. It has a bed, a table, and light, and you don't have to pay anything." The boy looked out the window. The street was full of people coming and going, carrying bags, talking on the phone, dodging bicycles. Everything looked the same, but something inside him was beginning to shift, as if the idea of a place was seeping into where before there had only been transients. "And if I don't want to stay?" he asked, still holding the key. "Then the door will stay open for whenever you want to come back," Daniel replied. "But I hope you try." The silence that followed wasn't uncomfortable. It was heavy. Jamal put the key in his pocket, along with the sketchbook. The gesture was quick but not rushed. They walked on. When they reached the corner where the street split, Daniel stopped. "I have to go this way." "And you?" Jamal looked down the street to the left, then to the right. Finally, he raised his eyes to Daniel. I'll see you there." He didn't say when, didn't say if it would be today, tomorrow, or next month. Daniel nodded, respecting the uncertainty. "I'll be there." The boy walked away, hands in his pockets, his steps steady but unhurried. Daniel watched until he disappeared into the crowd. Then he took a deep breath and began walking in the opposite direction. In the days that followed, Daniel stopped by the Harlem Community Arts Center whenever he could, discreetly checking room 3. Sometimes the bed was untouched, as if no one had slept there. Other times there were new papers on the desk, drawings left like silent signs. One night, when he entered, he found a sheet taped to the wall. It was a portrait. Ava, laughing, holding a pencil, trying to draw next to a male figure whose face once again was incomplete. At the bottom, written in small letters, "Some things don't need to be finished to know what they mean." Daniel smiled, feeling both a weight and a relief at the same time. He didn't know where Jamal was at that moment, nor when he would see him again. But he knew the door was still open. And sometimes, he thought, opening a door was the most transformative gesture one could make. Do you believe that a simple gesture can forever change the course of someone's life? Comment below. What was the simplest yet most transformative act someone has ever done for you? Leave a like if this story touched your heart, and subscribe to be part of a community that believes in the power of changing lives through small actions. Now stay tuned for another moving story.